Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. On today's episode, we bring back into the fold Mr. Jesse Salas by popular demand. I believe Jesse has an incredible way of articulating many different concepts within real estate, and Jesse will be a frequent guest on Rethink Real Estate. Jesse is the owner and operator of a San Diego network of Harcourts offices, as well as multiple different other networks and connections within many different training organizations through Mike Ferry, Tom Ferry, and many, many others. So that's why he has such a broad network and such a wide array of thoughts when it comes to real estate in all types of price points and in all types of markets. Today's topic that we're going to be going through with Jesse is what goes unsaid. So an example of that is, let's say that you would own a listing, a presentation, and it might be a colder listing presentation. It might not be one of your deeper relationships. What are they not telling you? Should you take on an overpriced listing? Probably, because they're not going to give you all of the details up front. We're going to talk about it in multiple different situations, whether it's a listing, whether it's a really good relationship that you have, a family member, a friend. There's still things that go unsaid, maybe because they're embarrassed, maybe of different other things. But today we're going to dive deeper into making sure we look out for that in all different situations, because there's plenty of things that go unsaid in multiple situations that can catch us off guard later. Hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. So, folks, one of our favorites, Jesse Salas, in Rethink Real Estate again. But, Jesse, how you doing? You doing all right?
Doing great. How about you?
Yeah, good. Mate, interesting topic that I've thrown upon you because I want your opinion on this, because you see a wider array of realtors in your role. Not to mention is the networks that you're connected in are all over the country. And I think it's something that at the moment we need to be very conscious of with all of the crisis that's out there in the moment in the banking world. There's been this philosophy of quiet quitting that has come into the workplace of people that, are still working, but essentially they've mentally quit. They haven't told anybody, but mentally they're out of here.
Checked out.
They're checked out's good. Checked out's a good word. Today's topic, I want to talk about what goes unsaid. And this can apply to whatever situation that you want to apply it to, but I'm going to apply it to in the listing presentation. You've got a seller that says to you, I don't need to sell my home. Give me an opinion of value. Oh, that's too low. I need it here. Or I don't need to sell. I'll just rent the place out, or whatever it may be. What's your experience with people giving you all the information up front? Do you think they typically do, or do you think they typically don't?
Oh, they never do. I mean, the reality is the way we go after business, majority of real estate agents are meeting these homeowners, these sellers for the first time, second time. So why would they open up to you and give you, show their hand, so to speak? They're not. They're going to be selective on what they want to share and what they don't want to share. And I feel sometimes as real estate agents, we're not identifying that. We're not realizing that. And we think, well, they liked me. They told me everything. And we go off of that limited information that we have. And then when we don't succeed, something fails, we wonder why, right? It's surprising how much we see it. And look, to be fair, I think human nature, we expect if we ask a question, somebody's going to give us the answer back. That's not always going to be the case. I think it's our job, though, to ask the better question, right? If you're not getting the right answer, ask a better question.
And for people that struggle to think about those better questions in the actual moment themselves, what would you say are some better questions? One comes to mind for me is simply asking them and continuing to remind them of also. So just give me an idea of if you sell this home, what does that mean for your next step? Like getting an understanding of what their next step is probably one of the most important elements of this that will continue to remind them of why they're doing it.
I think a lot of times, and I find myself this way too, every once in a while, I'm asking certain questions, and maybe it's about where you plan on going or what you plan on doing. And we kind of feel like we hit a mental roadblock. So for me, one of the easiest questions just to throw out there is, tell me more about that. Right? It does a couple things. It forces them now on their heels to answer that question a little bit deeper. And it also gives me some time to figure out where I need to go with the next question as well. So dual purposes with that question. It's one of my favorite questions. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's you. Yeah, I've seen you do that many times to me, so that's excellent. But I'm getting his playbook right now. Okay, by the way, folks. But I think that the other part about this is that you would have agents come to you all the time now and say, "Should I take an overpriced listing?" Because sellers' expectations around what their home is worth versus what it might be worth. There's obviously a gap in that.
Sure.
I've got a distinct way of thinking about that, and I want your opinion of whether or not you think it's right or wrong. Is that when a seller obviously gets 2 weeks down the path of a listing, they're probably more likely than to start opening up as you start meeting and communicating and giving them that feedback more and more, Jesse. Would you agree with the fact that they would, or do you think that most of the time, depending on the relationship, they're up front?
No, they're not upfront. I mean that goes into what I'm saying. And here's what I don't like, and I know a lot of people are going to frown when I say this, right? We will only take a listing if the seller is motivated, meaning they're willing to accept our price. Yet we go in there, as I mentioned before, with no credibility whatsoever. And it's not anything new that real estate agents have a particular stereotype, right? They think we're in it for ourselves. We just, the commission breath, right? We just want to sell the home, get paid, and move on, and with no care to what the seller is actually looking for. The only way you're going to build trust, the only way you're going to build rapport is over time. And I'm not a believer that you can build rapport over a 30-minute listing presentation. It's not realistic. We think that if we find out that we have the same type of dog, or we visited the same spot vacation wise, that we now have something in common and I built rapport. So I think that's just complete BS. You have to show that you're working hard. You have to show that you have experience. You have to show that you have market knowledge. You have to, go down the list, just like any relationship, right? Between two people, you have to build credibility and trust before they start believing and listening to you. And so, you mentioned something a little while ago, the number of agents that come up to me and say, Jesse, I have a seller that is unrealistic in price. Should I take a listing that's a little bit further out of the area that I cover? I mean, my first thought is yes, 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 and yes. I mean, the reality is, how many listings do you have? How many pendings do you have? How many have you closed this year? And for most of us, it's probably not where we want to be. So go get it. Go get something under your belt, right? Build that rapport. Show who you really are, and makes that seller understand. Are you going to come across a seller that is not going to budge? Sure, but you're never going to know that on day one.
We see this on the other side of the transaction as well. And let's say you're dealing with another agent and it's a negotiation. And at the moment, we're not seeing a great deal of multiple offer situations. And when we do, the agents are still trying to get a better deal because a buyer's perception is that the market's different and changed and all that type of stuff. What goes unsaid from an agent's perspective, Jesse? What are they trying to hold back, most of the time? Because, I think that the part of this that I see consistently is the agents trying to negotiate and not knowing actually how to negotiate and ruining the deal for their client just to do it for the sake of doing it.
Look, there's a couple things I think about that. I also feel like when we try to negotiate a deal, once we've taken on that listing, or maybe we're on the buyer side, I think we come in a little too hot, too hard, too heavy, too quickly, right? And not to sound like a broken record on what we just talked about, but we come in and we try to just, go for that knockout punch when we haven't really been able to establish any credibility with them, or given any kind of market data to make them feel like, hey, I may not like this answer, I may not like this option, but it's the right option to take. So I think from an agent's perspective, sometimes we need to massage, right, the seller or the buyer a little bit before we come in and say something that we know they're probably not going to be happy about. Might have got a little bit off topic with what you're saying, but all in all, I feel like that's, going back to the topic of this show, all of the things that go unsaid, we have to be ready for, and not just jump in and try to throw our own agenda and shove it down their throat.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to the next part of this is that the assumptions that are made by you, because then the other part that you can teeter on the edge of if you come at this, and I've got to be honest, is that there's a certain type of agent, Jesse, that you would see that is cynical on the world and cynical on people in general. So therefore they're like, oh, they're not giving me the whole answer. They're not giving me the whole truth, when they might be, and they never think anybody is. Now,
True.
there's another part of this as well, is that then, people that just believe everything that somebody says, you've got to find this happy medium in between of, well, maybe this could be the case, but maybe if they're telling me the truth, and obviously trying to navigate that interesting seesaw, so to speak, of back and forward, that interesting, pendulum swing. You can't go either side of it. You've got to stay relatively in the middle to the situation.
Look, I think since we're never going to really know if they're giving us everything or they're not, we have to stop being a reactionary agent. And I think that's what we tend to do. We react to what we hear instead of preparing for what we may not hear or may hear, right? And so in each and every one of my conversations and situations I really try to talk through it myself before I jump on that call, before I get into that meeting. How do I respond if the person says this? How do I respond if the person says that? There's just very little preparation, I think, for some of these conversations that can mean all the difference in the world on a smooth transaction or even a transaction actually coming together.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I want to throw another one at you and get your thoughts on this. It's fair enough to say that when people prospect and they're prospecting to get listings, then you have a very shallow relationship with most of the people. And it's actually really interesting to understand that, somebody will give a perfectly good stranger an opportunity to list one of their biggest assets in a transaction. And, somebody said this to me on a podcast, earlier this week was, the inexperience of a great deal of the agents that get given these listings is actually, it's funny that if you actually went through some of the real estate decisions that a lot of people have made for themselves personally, you would never allow these people to list your property. But
Mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. But not to go down that rabbit hole, but realistically, let's say that you've got a friend, a family member, or, a friend of a friend. I think they're probably less likely to tell you everything up front or their actual situation. I think there's a lot more in those situations that I've seen from a third-party perspective that goes unsaid because they're either embarrassed or they don't want that person in that sphere to know or something along those lines. Do you see that?
Yeah, and I think on both sides, right? The gap is even wider there because not only is the client maybe embarrassed or just doesn't want to share certain information with somebody that they're really close to, but the agent, we assume that they're telling us everything, right? Oh, this is our friend. Oh, of course they tell. They can't be any worse than somebody that we just met. So the gap between the friend, the family member, whoever it may be, I feel is even further apart on both sides.
Yeah. There's another thing from an embarrassment perspective that I want to get your take on because it's interesting. When I polled this sort of I was in a meeting this morning and I mentioned that this was going to be the topic I was talking to you about. And it was funny. Somebody brought up a point that I hadn't even thought of. They're like, yes, we've had a lot of buyers recently haven't adjusted their budgets with us because of the interest rate. And I feel like people are too embarrassed to do that with us to lower their budgets. So they're actually not shopping in a range that is affordable to them. So from a buyer perspective, where can you see this situation go? Like it works in all angles that people need to be thinking about this topic, right?
But before I answer that, let's actually apply that. Like, why would that happen? I think is important. Um, Spouses, right? Maybe the husband too lazy to update with, to take a call from the loan officer and submit new documentation. The husband maybe being embarrassed to say, hey, we can't afford that 4-bedroom, 3-bath. Now we're looking more of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, right? I see that a lot. And I mean, let's be honest, the communication between spouses is not the greatest, right? We can all relate to that. So I do see that out there, and I do see some frustration. And obviously, from our perspective, that becomes very difficult in trying to make sure that we can actually get an offer accepted and actually close that transaction. A lot of disappointment there. And then what do we end up seeing? That disappointment turns into, we just decided now's not the right time to buy. Now's not the right time to sell.
100%. It's funny, Jesse, you bring up something that I in a listing presentation training, there's multiple parts to the listing presentation training is that you go through the pre-stage, right? Where you make a phone call, hey, just wanted to get an idea of what your thoughts are for price. And I'm a big proponent on getting price out of the sellers before you go to the listing presentation. It's really interesting though, when you do get that price out of a seller, say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm on the phone with Mr. Seller. I saw a property sell at 38 Smith Street just down the road from you. Is your home better or worse? It's off for 550. Oh, my home's definitely better. So is it 550 to 6 or 6 to 650? Oh, it's definitely over 6. I'm like, okay, no problem. The thing that I would find, and one of the things that I've preached for a long time going into a listing presentation when you're setting the agenda, is you go through price first in my listing presentation agenda. And in that agenda, when I'm setting it, I would say to Mr. Seller, okay, one of the decision makers, I'd say, now when we're on the phone together, because we're only on the phone to one person, is that, hey, look, you said between 6 and 650 is where you thought the property was sitting. Then I would turn over to the other decision maker and say, are you on the same page? And first of all, it's interesting to see then the relationship between the two. One time out of, I don't know, probably 20, I would get the main decision maker going, oh, of course they are, like answer for them, right?
Yeah.
And then, but I'm going to go as far as 5 times out of 10, there would be a disagreement up front.
Yeah. It's a moving target, right? That communication, there you go again, right? What he wants isn't necessarily what she wants or vice versa.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And it just, this topic, when I thought about it, is that I thought about the topic because I'm just seeing people make assumptions that the truth is 100% what people tell them. And I'm not saying people are outwardly lying. All I'm saying is, Jesse, you put this point beautifully, and to tie a bow on it, ask better questions and ask more questions to make sure you get the full picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, how many times, and I'm sure many of the agents that are watching this, how many times have we heard one number from a seller, right? Or a buyer said, I'm not willing to pay more than this price, and they end up doing it.
Yeah.
Right? But they don't do it up front. And so again, for just reinforcing, I think we as agents, if we're not going to get the whole story up front, we have to make sure that we're building more credibility so that they feel comfortable either sharing or just accepting whatever we present. Which is why I feel like you take the deal no matter what, because you never know what's going to happen. And let's be honest, there's not many deals out there.
No,
right?
not at all.
Leverage that deal into something else at very least. But I think if we're doing what we should be doing as real estate agents and building that trust and credibility, you can now have a real honest conversation with that client and said, hey, look, you said 650 earlier. What's changed? Help me understand what's changed, right? You've hopefully, I like to use, when I'm in a transaction with a client, with text messages, emails, I like to throw in hashtag teamwork, right? And they love it, right? They feel like they're a part of a team, right? A lot of times it's us as the agent, them as the client. I want them to feel like they're involved in the conversation. I want them to feel like they're part of my team. And by building that rapport over time allows us to have more open conversations. And if I'm asking the right questions, I'm likely at that point going to get better answers from them as well. So that hashtag teamwork or team has really helped me out in the sense of just being able to ask difficult questions and also get those answers in some cases I may not want to hear, but I need to hear.
Can I ask a little bit more of an off-topic question? Because I think you're 100% right. I think the truth comes out, or the real whole picture comes out when somebody trusts you or somebody feels comfortable with you. Trust might be a pretty abrasive word. Trust is something that needs to be earned. It can't be given. But I guess that, let's say somebody's comfortable with you. How do you make them comfortable with you as quickly as possible, Jesse, in your eyes? I know that you may, like, that's a really piece of gold there. Hashtag teamwork, or just say, hey, it's all about teamwork, whatever it may be, bringing it into the team and making them feel like that it's all a team in order to get this property sold. How do you make them as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible, to get the whole story?
Like, it's so funny as I'm running trainings with the office. So many of my analogies have to do with relationships, right? So many analogies. And when you really think about it, there's so many instances, whether it's prepping for an appointment, the conversation for the appointment, the actual appointment, the negotiations. If you really look at it and look at what we do, we don't treat the other side, our client, like it's a relationship. Right. I mean, I love the saying, be the advisor, don't be the salesman. Right. But that's why I like to go one step further. With an advisor, there can be somewhat conflict there. There can be disagreement. Right. But when you're a team and you're running together, right, you're dealing with the negatives. I'm dealing with the negatives, but we also enjoy the positives together. There's something about that creates that that trust, like you said, that takes time, but it builds it so much faster. You now have an ally with you, right? To be able to encounter anything that maybe doesn't go the way you want it to go. Um, I'm really big on looking at every situation as how would I treat my girlfriend? How would I treat my wife? That type of thing. And you can really, find yourself saying, ooh, I wouldn't say that to her. Why would I say this to my client? Or I wouldn't be as harsh and abrasive with something like that. Maybe I need to soften it a little bit or plant the seed now and come back later. All of those things I think help build that trust over time.
I think that this has been a curly topic today, folks, and Jesse's the right person to deal with it because of his wide experience with multiple different people doing multiple different levels of business, not only himself as well, in very, very different marketplaces. So, Jesse, we appreciate your insights into what goes unsaid.
Absolutely. Love it, buddy. Thanks
Thanks,
for
man.
having me on.
Of course. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.